Okay, welcome everybody. What are we calling this? Is this lesson 4? Yeah, it must be lesson 4. My apologies for being in a car. I'm driving to New Mexico. I'm in New Mexico. I just haven't gotten to where I'm supposed to be in New Mexico yet. So I stopped for this call. I've made Kelly co-host. You know what? I'm going to make you host.
All right.
So that if anything weird happens, like the police show up, I'm actually parked outside of a police station. Then she can proceed. But anyway, welcome. So today we're talking about avionics bays, which is another big build step. Last week we talked about modeling simulations. Hopefully you've made some progress on that. And then next week is our last full all-team meeting where we'll talk about everything else. Everything else is in how to vent this part and how to calculate the size of your explosive charges and how to grind your motor down and many things. But they're all little things and not so important for building. That said, it would be good if your building was done before next lesson. In fact, it would be good if your structure was done now. That's what we asked, although I realize that may not have happened for every group. We'll go around the table and see how people are doing in a minute. And then this week, build an AVBay and install it and program it and everything. AVBay completed before we talk next. That would be what we would appreciate, so that when we talk next, you can sign up for a checkout interview. So the checkout interviews will be the 1 week following the next lesson. So beyond next Thursday through the following Thursday, maybe Friday, and then we fly, weather permitting. So anyway, even this week, you might want to start talking to people about when you could get more than just 1 or 2 representatives from the team, preferably the whole team, together to check out the rocket with us. Virtually is an option, but if you happen to be in town, I'm not in town, but I'll be back. You could check them out in person with me if you'd like. So that's the plan. AVBays today. But before we do that, let's just go around the horn here alphabetically. Why not? So just a sentence or two about how you're doing on both airframe and modeling, as in working on the open rocket model. So Augsburg, how's it going?
It's going well. Our airframe is in good shape, I would say. We're finishing the last few pieces of epoxying. We got our rail button, our aft rail button installed today. I think we'll be putting on our aft thrust plate tomorrow. Our coupler, our piston are done. Our nose cone's done. So I feel okay about it. We've got to tie things together with the recovery harness or the pieces that aren't attached and figure out parachutes and such. But yeah, in general, we're in decent shape. As far as modeling goes, I've opened up and played around a bit with what we were working with last week, but we are not there yet, but we'll be soon.
Okay, thank you. Century? I'm not hearing you, Owen.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
All right. So we got our airframe complete, all the epoxy work's done, and we got all of our fin fillets sanded, and we're starting to think about what we're gonna do for like surface finish, whether we do like paint or what. And we've got all of our simulations done this week as well.
Okay, we'll be interested in seeing your simulations in advance of our checkout interview, but definitely also during the checkout interview. A quick comment to respond to both of those first two. You mentioned, Tom, the rear rail button. This is good. Don't place your front rail button unless you have permission from us. And that is because that's important to place based on simulations. And if you haven't done simulations, you don't know where to place it, and that's okay. Fine.
I had a brief freak out for a moment. I thought we had gone too far since we'd epoxied our motor mount tube in. And Kelly put my mind at ease and was like, as long as you don't have that the aft thrust plate on yet, you can still do the button. So we got that marked up and it's all good.
Glad to hear that. Is anybody on from Duluth?
Nobody is on from Duluth.
I'll get back to them. Fond du Lac.
Hello there. I'm at the Minneapolis airport with my crew here for the ballooning project. So we're in the same state as James. Yeah, we're pretty much done with the fin can of the rocket, except for filleting some of the outer things. I think we're in good shape there. Haven't put the rail button on yet. And we put the piston together, but haven't tied anything together. Nose cone has the bolt in it, but I don't think it's tightened, but that'll be easy. So we're doing pretty well, I think.
What about simulations?
Oh yeah. I worked with Jesse and Eric on that. Eric and I did a parallel effort, and we discovered something interesting last night, that even though we thought we were making the same changes to your model, we ended up with two wildly different stabilities. And it turned out one of us had the fins sticking out an inch farther than the other. So I didn't realize that that made such a huge difference, but it makes a gigantic difference.
It makes a gigantic difference. Yep.
No, we have to change the materials. A lot of the things say they're cardboard, so we haven't fixed that yet. But we did think, well, I am curious about one thing. Why is the parachute icon that you put in there a bigger icon than the parachute icon that was created when we installed a parachute? It's a different size icon.
No idea, except that I might have been using an older version of Open Rocket than you, maybe, or the other way around. But I don't know, and I really don't care. But that's an interesting thing to notice, unless Kelly happens to know. Parachute icons, anything, Kelly?
It depends on how so every single icon, and it's just an icon, so it's not really overly important as long as you have the mass and the size in there. The icon itself is just based on the particular thing you picked. For instance, if you were to pick a battery icon, it would be different than if you were to pick a recovery icon, but it's just the icon. So it's not, it's ultimately not a big deal.
No, I figured it wasn't important.
Okay, but I did notice that the current version of Open Rocket has a much higher number than the version in some of the videos that I have out there. So hopefully it's not changed too much. How about Inver Hills?
Yes.
How's it going?
Good.
Are you done
With what?
with your rocket? Your airframe, is it finished?
No, it is close to. We will have it done by this week.
30 seconds or less, what's not done, and also tell us about simulation. 30 seconds or less.
About rocket simulation?
How is it going?
So
Last
just
Like
to,
what?
just to
last
jump
week-
in for a second, Dr. Flaten,
Great.
she
Go ahead.
joined late because she couldn't get in. So
We're
she
just
doesn't
going-
know what you're asking.
We're going around the horn here, just getting updates. How is your rocket build going? How are your simulations going? Please be brief.
It's all going good. By simulations, do you mean like Open Rocket?
That's what I mean.
Yeah, we did get that finished.
Okay, share that with Kelly so that she can check it over, please. And then
Okay.
what has not been finished on your airframe so as of now? What's not finished?
The fins.
That's kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
Okay, considering that Kelly is from Inver Hills, I suspect she's kind of familiar with what's going on there. That's good. Let's see, Normandale.
Hello. Our airframe is complete in our simulation. We have a working model that has everything we've done on our airframe so far. So our simulation has everything but the forward rail button. And then it has like parachutes and other masses as best as we can guess, seeing as we haven't fully assembled. We don't know
Okay, so-
exactly what those are going to look like fully assembled.
That's good. So that brings up the fact that we're about to build an av bay, and once you've built the av bay, then you will know how heavy it is, and then you can add it to your simulation. Right now, you may have estimated that there's going to be an av bay, and it might have 6 or 8 ounce worth of the weight. And if it's really 7.2 ounces or 1.7 ounces, you should change your model. St. John's,
St. John's is not here.
St. Thomas,
So we have most of our airframe done. Pretty much what we have left is the epoxy to the outside, like the actual body tube, but our motor set thing is done. We also have most of our simulation done. We need to add in, make sure we know how to do parachute, shot cord, and then add in like other weights.
so remember, I did some, but not all of that, and you're welcome to use what I did and then do likewise, perhaps for a second parachute.
Okay.
I see Duluth is here. Calvin, how is it going? We're asking everybody to give us a quick update about airframe build, in particular, what hasn't been done. We were hoping everything would be done. And model simulation, how's that going?
Yeah, so our general airframe is done. There's a few things that we need to tweak because I wasn't there during the original build. But that's going to be finished this weekend, and then simulation is basically done, but still tweaking a few more things.
Okay, so as we continue today and maybe next week's lesson, those might both change your mind a little bit about your simulations, hopefully not a lot. Kelly, can you keep an eye open for St. John's, and we will press on with new material.
St. John's does not have the access code. They never emailed me.
Please keep an eye open on email then for St. John's. Anyway, thanks. Here's what we're doing. We're talking about av bays, and so I'm going to show you what you already know. I have a few with me. Amazing. Av bays in New Mexico. So here is the av bay structure. So basically it's got the plates on it. It's got a eye bolt on both ends. And this particular one has, we'll talk about this more, a place to attach wires, a cup into which you can put ejection charges. This is part of the innards, so that has that on both ends. And I'm going to unscrew this end. This is how it goes. So this, I'm unscrewing the bottom. The top has been put on with lock nuts, so it doesn't unscrew easily at all. The bottom has been put on with regular nuts. They could have been wing nuts, except they struck the cup. They put the cup too close. So you might want to watch out for that. If you want to use wing nuts, you don't have to. Then make sure that nothing is too close so they can still screw on. Then I take it off. And when I take it off, remember that's self-centering. Then I can actually take all of the stuff out. And here is the av bay airframe part. This is not the av bay av part, the avionics part. This is just the airframe part. So it's got these two threaded rods. And notice things stick out here, which might make it difficult for a sled, for instance, to fit up right next to that. Okay, so this is not news. Hopefully you knew that was coming. You maybe even have that finished. Now let's talk a little bit about what goes inside. And so this is an example of a payload bay. Payload bay means a place to put stuff. And av bay, avionics bay, means a place to put avionics, electronics. And you could imagine that your electronics could do a variety of things. It could be a camera, you know, it could be a data logger like an altimeter 2, or it could be what I would consider a genuine altimeter. So a genuine altimeter is something that can sense the performance of the rocket and do something about it, in particular, fire charges. And so I don't like the altimeter 2 name because an altimeter 2 is a data logger. It's not an altimeter. An altimeter is something that can do something. And so we provided you with a specific altimeter. It's called an AIM USB. Typically what you'll do is you'll make a sled, and we've given you some materials out of which you could make the sled, although you don't have to use our materials. The sled has to attach to the threaded rods somehow. Typically it slides on and off, and it has to be shaped so that it doesn't wiggle around inside at all once the thing is closed up. So I'm just going to show you two sleds that I happen to have with me, okay? So here's a sled. This particular sled has some notches on the two ends. Those notches are to avoid nuts, in particular the nuts associated with the eye bolts. And then it has some things mounted. And so this is vertical, and it says up. It's a good idea on your sled. Up and down are very important on the sled, so you should just label it up and down. So that's the up part. This particular sled has tubes, and so the threaded rods go through the tubes. I didn't provide you with tubes. You're welcome to do this if you can find some tubes. and then it has electronics mounted on the surface. Here's another sled. This one is similar, just has different electronics. Here is up, this and up. There's the arrow, this and up. And in this particular case, the way the threaded rod goes is it goes through this cross piece. And you'll notice, somewhat unusually, the electronics are actually mounted on the threaded rod side, as opposed to on the other side. And the reason is there's something else on the other side. So that's where these electronics mounted, and they mounted between the threaded rods. You probably won't do it this way unless you have a good reason to put something else on the other side. But this is a possible way to mount your sled onto your threaded rod, and then they just need to be glued together carefully, of course. And I think this was just done with wood glue, although it could have been epoxy. Maybe this was epoxy, but it could be wood glue. It turns out that this is close to what you will build. And the reason I say that is because this, in fact, is an AIM USB altimeter. The other one that I showed you, which is physically smaller and actually quite a bit more expensive and somewhat cooler and unavailable. So I didn't give you one. It's called a Raven. Some of you have a Raven, and so you might want to look into how to use a Raven. But for this project, our expectation is to use the AIM USB altimeter, this one. And then next to it is a place for a battery to mount. So the plan is to use a 9-volt battery. And then, of course, you'll need to wire the battery to the AIM USB to power it. So I wish I had a whiteboard, and I don't know how to use the whiteboard in Zoom, and I'm not going to stumble around with learning how in front of you. So here's the deal. Listen carefully. I'm going to describe what the wiring needs to do. And then I'm going to show you how the wiring works, at least for the AIM USB. Before I do that, though, let me point out what I have posted. Sorry, should have done that. Could have done that earlier. Here we go. Share screen. Host has disabled participant screen sharing, and I'm not even the host. Kelly, can you fix that?
In a second. Also, I have my avionics bay all wired if you want me to show that.
We'll look at it in a minute. Thank you for reminding me. So how about we talk through what the wiring needs to accomplish, and then we'll look at one that's actually wired up. Here we go. So let's just take a quick look at what's posted recently. So remember, I'm numbering the posts based on the lesson, and so that means the number 4 posts are the most recent. Interestingly enough, here's a number 3 post that I didn't post last week. I just posted it this week. This is the documentation for OpenRocket. If you want to do some reading, great. If you figured it out based on our lesson and your own poking around, maybe you don't need it. For lesson 4, here's the manual for the AIM USB. You probably should have someone read that. Here's the wiring diagrams for all 3 of the typical altimeters, a Raven, a Stratologger, and an AIM USB. We'll look at that in a minute. Here's the homework and vocabulary, and then here's some AIM USB files. We'll need those in a moment as well. Let's take a quick look at the vocabulary here. So I've already said much of this, but remember, this is called an AV bay or an avionics bay. It's useful to have a removable AV bay. And the reason is, well, because you can, something's dinging at me. Hopefully nothing important. It's useful to have a removable AV bay because you can put it in another rocket. Well, maybe that's not so useful if you only have one rocket, but it's also useful because then you can take it out of the rocket and work on it, or at least take the sled out of the rocket. So we're going to set this up so the AV bay can come off the rocket altogether. We'll rivet it in place. In other words, rivets are things that hold pieces together and don't break during a flight. And then shear pins. My car is really unhappy with me. One moment. My car doesn't know why I'm sitting here with a car running and I'm not driving. Okay. But I'm doing so because I need the power from the car. So where was I? Yes. Basically, next week we'll talk about rivets and shear pins. Both of them are ways to pin together pieces of the rocket. Rivets don't break and shear pins are intended to break if you apply enough force. So we'll rivet the AV bay, but we can take the rivets out and get the AV bay out if we need to. Remember that the AV bay is being built inside the coupler tube. That's not perhaps the only place you could put an AV bay or put a payload bay in general, but it makes a lot of sense. You just need to put bulk heads on both ends of the coupler tube to prevent the explosions which are happening from getting corrosive gas on your electronics. So there's a sled. We talked about the sled. We talked about ways to attach it. We haven't talked about the switch. You'll want to, we've given you a screw switch, and the screw switch could be attached. I'll just show you this, although I realize it might be kind of small, attached either to the sled, but we don't want you to do that. We want you actually to attach your screw switch to the collar of the avbay, the coupler tubes. So in other words, to the airframe, not to the sled. In that case, in both cases, you'll have to wire the switch to the rest of the electronics. And just a point about these switches, they're screw switches, which means you screw them to close them. And they're very tight. And the reason they're tight is so that they don't come unscrewed when you jostle them, which you will jostle them when you put them on a rocket flight. So this means you have to push and turn. So when you push and turn at the same time, that's called a wrench. And you need to mount your switch so that it's capable of dealing with a wrench. Push and turn at the same time without coming loose. So however you mount it, it has to be very firmly mounted. And if you push it and break it away from whatever it's attached to, when you are screwing it shut, you might not fly because it's hard to fix that. For orientation, the battery holder, this is important. We want to place the battery, the 9-volt battery, with its terminals on the bottom. What that means is that when the rocket accelerates as it launches, the battery, if anything, gets pressed more tightly into its terminals. You don't want the battery to come loose from its terminals and your electronics to fail on you. So mount your battery upside down. This is actually a rule for AAA, but they won't catch you if you break it because they don't open your avbay and look. We will open your avbay and look, okay? So make sure you mount your battery holder with the terminals down. The battery itself can be above or below other things, but the battery has to have its terminals down, and that's why you need your sled labeled up and down. We use Duracell batteries. I've provided you with one, mostly because they are higher quality on the inside. Batteries of this sort have multiple cells that are either press-fit together inside the case or welded together inside the case. And in the case of a rocket, when you have significant thrusts and significant accelerations and you hit the ground hard once in a while, okay, you want to make sure that your battery is as strong as possible, even on the inside. Batteries can fail on the inside, and you can't even tell from the outside that there's something wrong. So Duracell is the best way to go. It's not my favorite battery for cold temperature applications, but it is my favorite battery for rocketry applications, which I like to do when it's not too cold. You may end up having to do some soldering, especially on your switch. We're going to use lever nuts, not terminal blocks technically, for making attachments on the two ends. But there may be some soldering associated with attaching some of the wires. You'll also need to be able to screw the wires into certain terminal blocks on the AM USB. So make sure you have a small screwdriver. I don't think I provided you with one. Next week, we'll talk about calculations associated with venting the avbay and sizing your charges, your explosive charges. Today, we're going to talk about wiring the avbay, and you need to know what to watch, what to listen for as far as beeping patterns when you actually operate the device. And we want to make sure the avbay is as explosive tight as possible. So sometimes we'll drill holes for wires to go through, and then we'll try to fill the holes either with epoxy if we don't need the wires to come out, or maybe with putty if we need the wires to come out once in a while. I list here 3 different kinds of altimeters, in part because some teams already have the other kinds, but we are using the middle one, the AIM USB Inticore altimeter, and that's the one we'll spend most of our time talking about. That's all I got for vocabulary. Let me take a quick look at the homework document.
Just to specify, we did give you this particular screwdriver, and it does have small enough heads on it to be able to take care of everything.
Thank you. I'd forgotten that. Yes. So that basically has 8 tips. 6 of them are in the handle. 2 of them are in the device. Pull out the thing, turn it around, and put it back in, and you can get a different size and a different shape of screwdriver head. Make sure you don't lose those tips. Some of them, different ones, will be useful for different parts of this project. Okay, so here's lesson homework. There's a few additional chapters in the book. There's not that many left, actually. You might want to take a look at the featherweight interface program. That's for the Raven. You will have to take a look at the interface program that goes with the AIM USB. So make sure you do download that for sure. I'll show you that in a minute. Keep working on your open rocket model. Most people are still tweaking that. And then start talking among yourselves about when you could do a checkout interview. But the rocket has to be done, and the AVBE has to be done, and the model has to be done, and the flight readiness review slides have to be done, all of them.
I think
In
Dr.
advance
Flaten,
of your checkout interview. So for the go ahead.
you
Kelly?
you walked up there for a moment.
Okay, sorry. I was just pointing out that you need to start talking about your checkout interview, but lots of things have to be finished before you can have the interview. And so if you choose a date, then you are committed to finishing them. Or you can finish them and then choose the date, but either way, you need to choose the date soon. I would suggest that we talk about those dates starting in this lesson next week. And if you're not ready to choose the date next week, be ready to choose it within a couple days of next week's lesson, please. You need to finish building your airframe. You need to build your sled and put all the electronics on it. So you need to finish your AVBE. That's essentially this week's main homework. Build the AVBE.
Professor Flaten,
Go ahead.
can we still be painting does the rocket have to be painted before our checkout with you?
No. So here's the deal. The rocket does not have to be painted at all. I'd like you to paint your rocket. And so I would encourage you to think about when to paint it, but don't have it wet with paint when we're checking it out, because you need to be touching it at that moment. So if it's painted, super. If it's not painted, that's okay. If you do your checkout the day before we fly it and it's not painted, it's not going to get painted apparently, because it takes time to paint a rocket. So get everything done, get the rocket checked out, and then paint it in parallel with that, making sure the painting does not interfere with the fact that we need to have a checkout. I would like your rockets to be painted. I'm not insisting upon it. I'm not providing you with any paint. And don't get yourself in trouble. My students regularly get themselves in trouble by painting in their dorm rooms or other places they're not supposed to paint. Don't do that. That's what I've got. I'm going to show these wiring diagrams. Actually, let me show the wiring diagrams, and then let's have Kelly show us her actual AVBE, and then we'll back up and talk through, as much time as we have, how it was built that way and why it was built that way. So this document shows 3 different altimeters, and notice, for instance, for the Raven, the switch is placed in between the battery and the device. That's what we're going to do also. It turns out the Stratologger has a place to put wires for a switch. The other 2 do not have places to put wires for a switch. You need a switch, and the switch needs to be switchable after the rocket is fully sealed up. So it has to be reachable from the outside, even though the switch is presumably somewhere on the inside, or at least on the surface of the rocket. Okay? So if you're using a Raven, you're not for this project, but you might have one around. Pay attention to this kind of a document, which shows you how to use a Raven to wire up to 4 different charges. The 4 charges are named APO, which stands for apogee, main, which is pretty obvious. That's the main charge that you want to come out, you want to explode on the descent before you reach the ground. And then channel 3 and channel 4, which can be used for additional charges, typically to back up. In other words, a duplicate apogee charge or a duplicate main charge, possibly to fire a second or 2 later than the first one, just in case, and possibly to have a bigger explosive. It's like, try 1 gram, and if 1 gram doesn't work, try 2 grams 2 seconds later. Hopefully that will work. This is a device that has both a barometer, in other words, a pressure sensor, as well as accelerometers. The other 2 altimeters I'm showing you are less expensive and only have barometers. So what that means for a Raven, though, is that it knows whether you're right side up or upside down, and it will not talk to you if it's not oriented the way it thinks it needs to be. So it's a little more finicky in that sense. Our altimeter, the AIM USB, doesn't care which way you mount it, although I kind of recommend you mount it vertically, but it doesn't have an up and a down end. The Raven definitely does care about that sort of stuff. The Stratologger is interesting because it has a push button on the surface that allows you to program it. You don't actually have to program it with a computer and with software, although you can. This particular one on the A side has a place for a battery to be attached. And then B is a pair of terminal blocks for a switch to be attached. And then C and D are for apogee and main. And that's how ours is too. 2 channels, not 4 channels. One typically used at apogee for a drogue, one typically used as a main charge. This is the most important one. This is ours. Okay. So notice on the left-hand side, it has a place that says V plus and V minus. That's where the battery goes. Notice there's no switch here. So pay close attention. I'm going to describe how to put a switch here. The place in between V plus and V minus, labeled C, I think C probably stands for common, is not electrically attached to anything. So you can wire things to C and they will not impact anything else. So here's the way to do it. You take your battery and don't wire it to V minus and V plus. You wire it to V minus and C. And then you take your switch and you wire your switch from C to V plus. In other words, when the switch is closed, it connects C, common, to V plus, and then your battery goes from V minus through C to V plus. So that's how we're going to wire it, not with the battery directly to V minus and V plus, but with the battery from V minus to C and the switch from C to V plus. I don't have a switch on me, so I'm going to demonstrate this thing in a minute, going straight from V minus to V plus, but you need to put a switch in, and Kelly has put a switch in. On the other end, there's an A and a B and a C. C again is common. So A stands for apogee, basically. So that's where you put your explosive charge between A and C. The explosive charge you want to go off at apogee. That's the drogue charge, so that will be below the av bay. We're going to fire a charge at apogee, and we're going to use the motor eject, which also has a charge, the motor does, a little bit after apogee just to back up what we do. We're going to try and get the drogue out ourselves, and if it doesn't work, we'll let the motor get it out for us. And then the B, which is not A, so apparently that's for main, that's going to get wired between B and common. And that's the one that goes off at on the way down, maybe at 500 feet, 150 meters approximately. So this is the kind of device we're using. And notice on the right-hand side, there's places for 2 E-matches, 2 igniters, it describes them as, but they will physically be far apart from each other. One will be at the bottom of on the outside of the bottom of the av bay. That's for the drogue charge, that's channel A. And the other one will be outside the top of the av bay. That's for the main charge, that's channel B. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and give Kelly a moment or two to show you an av bay, and then we will return to talking a little bit about wiring in more detail and programming it. That's important. I want to do some simulations and show you the programming. So go ahead, Kelly. I'm not going to spotlight you because you're the host. You can spotlight yourself, but right now you look big on my screen, so you're good.
Okay, so a couple things. You'll notice that there are 3 holes right here on the outside. That's where your rivets are going to be at the halfway point. That rivets your top half to your avionics bay. And then
we'll talk about that next week, rivets next week. Okay. But go ahead with anything you want, but rivets next week for sure.
So you'll notice here, I've got my switch. It's kind of embedded in there. You only have the 2 things holding it down, and the middle part just kind of sits directly in there. So this is almost an inch wide. If you're going to modify your switch band at all, make sure you give yourself an inch space so that can fit in there. On the ends, you can see that I've got the little mounting block that comes in your kit to add the wires, and I've got the charge cup on there, and that's on both sides.
Okay, quick question, Kelly. I think those lever nuts just short between the 2 terminals, so I think you're going to need 2 lever nuts on each end.
This one?
Is that not true? It looks like you only have 1 lever nut on the end of that.
The wing nut?
No, the lever nut, the terminal block.
Oh, this one.
Yes. That's what you need for 1 wire, but there are 2 wires. You need a second one for the other wire.
Oh, it goes between the 2. Okay. I thought you just put it in with both sets of, okay, never mind. Yeah, that's easy enough.
Well, check it out. Check it out electrically. I've never used these. Someone just recently suggested them to me, but I think they just short the 2 things that you put in the 2 holes, short them together to each other.
Okay.
And so that means you need 2 of them.
Yeah, I was thinking that you put both in one, both in the other. Okay. Not a problem though, because there's more. You can see there's more than enough room to put another one on there on both ends.
And then you're going to open it up and take a look inside.
So the thing with this is I've made my wires just barely long enough to fit in here. I don't like having a bunch of wires hanging out inside of here. So when I open it, you'll notice that it's tight to start with. There's not a whole lot of room right there. And when I pull the board out, there's also not a lot of room. So the board is tight in there at the moment. So for me, what I have to do is I'm going to have to take these wires out of the contraption that you saw in the end with the orange end caps.
And you're opening the bottom of the Ave. That's the bottom end.
Yep. So I basically pull my end cap off, and then I take the rest of this and I pull it to here, and you'll notice it also doesn't come off. One of these wires, this long loose one, was on the other on the end cap, but this one goes in and mounts to that switch up in there. So you've got to give yourself enough room that you can actually slide that back in there. So once I remove that from the altimeter, it's just going to take half a moment here. I recommend when you take care of your wires that you solder the ends of the wires themselves, because you will find yourself putting these together and taking them apart often enough. I don't know if you can kind of see that.
So they're braided wires, but you have not only twisted them together at the ends, but you even put a little solder in them to make them almost like solid at the ends.
Correct.
Okay.
What we end up with then is something like this, where you've got your apogee, and the apogee on this one is the blue and the red wire, and the blue and the red wire is going to go all the way to the other end, because if you think about it, these are sealed up. So those are going to be facing the upside, and that's going to be the end. That's going to be in your upper body tube. That's all connected. You can't get to that. So you know that the other end is your lower part, and the lower part is where apogee is. That's where the motor does its ejection at apogee. That's where we have a backup. So this will run all the way down through the bulk plate here, and that will help with the apogee charge. The other one, the red and the green wire, is going to go to the main chute, and that one is quite a bit shorter in my setup because I have it mounted right here. And you'll notice that there are only two terminals right here that are connected, the common and the positive. The negative isn't connected on here because that gets connected to these two wires, and that's how we do that bridging of the gap right there to go from common to negative, or at least in my situation to negative. It doesn't really matter which one you bridge, just as long as you get your battery terminal right. But that would be how you set it up. So the common just jumps from the common to one of them through the switch. A is always going to be apogee. B is always going to be your main chute at like 500 feet. So when you mount this, another important thing to note is, once again, this end doesn't open up. So that's going to be facing up. And you'll notice that my battery is facing downwards. You need the terminals facing down, so when the force of the rocket pushes against it, it's pushing into the battery terminals, and it's not separating from that.
Okay, so a couple comments about what she just said. Number one, that's a lovely Ave, very well laid out. There's two things. One thing I would have done a little differently had I been building it myself. And so I guess you can take your pick. Your Ave, the sled is not actually removable. You took the cover out, the outside cover off. You didn't take the sled out. I would have done it the other way around. And here's why. Basically, the outside part is going to be riveted to the airframe. And so I would prefer that the sled would be able to slide out. But I know your sled can't slide out because you have a wire that attaches your sled to your upper plate, and it's only this long. I would have made that wire this long, so I could have gotten the thing out. But I will agree, the way I'm suggesting ends up with lots more sort of loose wires in there. And so it's not as neat as yours, but I think it's a little bit more serviceable. And so think about what needs to be done. Think about what you need to reach at what time, and then build an Ave that allows you to do the right things. And so generally speaking, if the sled were to be removable, that just means that the wire from the altimeter to the upper end does not come out. So that stays in the rocket and the sled comes out if you do it this way. then you need very long wires between the altimeter and the upper end, and you also need pretty long wires between the altimeter and the switch, because the switch also stays with the rocket and the sled comes out of the rocket. In Kelly's case, what she's done is she set it up with shorter wires, and she's planning to take off the outer casing and expose the sled in place. I was planning, when I would build rockets at least, usually I would take the sled out and leave the casing in place. You need to do one or the other.
It's a little more complex the way I've done it, but I like to set up kind of like an artistic look to it.
No, it's very beautiful, and it's very neat, neater than mine, no doubt.
One last thing I have to show you guys is when you turn the screw on this, you're going to hear this tone, this particular tone here.
I'm not hearing it.
You can't, it's not beeping for you.
On the other hand, I have one, and I was going to demonstrate it, so maybe not. We can get mine close enough to the microphone for you to hear it. Why don't I try and show the beeping patterns, okay? Anything more you want to show us, Kelly? Otherwise, I'll jump back to.
Nope, I've spotlighted you.
Very good, thank you. Okay, so here's the deal. Here's the ave, the innards. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a battery in here, and I'm going to, just for first demonstration, I want to listen to the beeping patterns. And I just want to point out that in this case, I'm connecting my battery to the top and to the bottom. So these wires are longer than you might expect. And I don't have a switch, so I'm just going to put the battery straight in. And then here is where my two charges are going to attach. And right now what I've done is I've actually put in LEDs into those locations. These are LEDs that have internal resistors. Normally, when you use an LED and you apply 9 volts, it goes pop, unless you put a 1K resistor in series with it to prevent it from carrying too much current. So I'm using LEDs that don't need that, but if you want to test this, and I would recommend you might want to test this sort of thing, you might need to add some extra resistors in series with the LEDs. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to find myself a battery. Here we go. And let's see if we can hear this as it beeps. I'll tell you what to expect. It's going to do 4 checks. The first check is the battery voltage adequate? And if it is adequate, it'll go beep, 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 3 beeps, all quite short. And then it's going to say, is the memory adequate? And it's going to go beep, 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 all quite short. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to actually disconnect one of my LEDs right now. And the reason is it's also going to say, is there anything connected to the drogue side? And is there anything connected to the main side? And if it says beep, 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 that means something's connected. And if it goes beep, beep, beeps, slower beeps, that means disconnected. So right now, I just disconnected channel A. So here's what I expect. I expect 3 beeps that say good battery, 3 beeps that say good memory, and then 3 long beeps that say nothing is connected drogue side, and then 3 short beeps, meaning something is still connected on the main side. And maybe you can hear the beeps and maybe you can't. We'll try. Can you hear that?
No, it doesn't sound like, I think it's outside of the range that it picks up.
Okay, take my word for it. Here's what it did, and maybe it actually filters out these kind of beeps. Right now, okay, so first of all, it did just what I expected. 3 short beeps, okay battery, 3 short beeps, okay memory, 3 long beeps, nothing attached to drogue, 3 short beeps, something attached to main, okay? And right now, this may or may not show up, but it turns out that the LEDs are actually glowing a little bit. What that means is when the thing is activated, it sends a little trickle of current through all of the ejection charges, not enough to fire them, but a little trickle, and then those will get really bright when the time is right. So right now it's just beep, beep, beep over and over again. That means I'm ready for anything. In fact, I'm ready for a launch. So I'm going to take my battery off. And then I want to show you the software quickly. I'm going to rewire my drogue side with my screwdriver.
And kind of to tell you what it goes beep, 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 beep. And then after that series of 9, it will just go beep, beep, beep.
So those
Beep.
even beeps, that means it's waiting. It's waiting for something to happen. And in particular, it's waiting to notice a change in pressure, which means that, oh, I must be flying. And then it's time to do something serious. Okay, so here it is. And now I need to find the USB cord. I'm going to plug it in to my computer. Be a little careful when you plug these things in. If you push too hard on them, you can shear off the USB connector. I had some students who sheared off one in a Raven. So I gave them another Raven and they sheared it off in the second Raven and I didn't give them any more after that. So what I do is I put my thumb on the USB connector while I'm plugging it in to try and protect it. Okay, so I just plugged this in. There's no battery in it right now. So I'm going to attach it to my computer and I want to see what my computer knows about the device. So here we go, back to share screen. Let me turn this off and I'm going to run the software. Here we go. So this is the AIM USB software, and frankly, just a blank screen because I haven't done anything yet. But if I go to Tools, I can say Control Device, and it will say, I found a device, but oh, by the way, it's not powered, which is true. It's not powered. But I can actually say Read Pressure, and it will say you are at about 6,400 feet, which could be true because I'm in New Mexico. And then it says, I can ask it read battery voltage, and it says there is no battery. That's not so good. So if I put a battery on, let me just do that right now. Put the battery on and then ask it to read the battery voltage. Hopefully I'll get a better number than that. Okay, so the battery's on, but since I'm plugged in, it's not beeping, in fact, at all, because it knows that I'm not really flying it. I'm testing it. Read battery voltage now, 9.5 volts. This is good. In other words, I have a pretty fresh battery. Typically a 9-volt battery, when it's fresh, will give you more than 9 volts. And you can program this thing to say anything below some other number like 8.5 volts is not fresh enough. This one is considered a fresh battery, and it is. This is good. And then I can say fire lines for 2 seconds. So I'm going to hold this up, and I want you to watch those 2 LEDs and see if they glow brightly. Ha, look at that. Let me do it again. So this is a test. I'm testing to see whether or not the thing is able to do what it needs to do. Notice emulate launch. Emulate launch is actually grayed out, and the reason is I haven't loaded any data. What it wants to do is take data from a device like this and pretend to do the flight. So let me close this. Let me go to File, and let me say Open. And let me see if I can find on my desktop some AIM USB flights. There it is. I'm going to just grab this very first one. It's called, no, I'm going to grab the last one, K1200. K1200, open. No, I didn't want the last one. I wanted the first one, sorry. Okay, so this is actual data from a flight. This is up here, the altitude. So it goes up to some altitude, maybe 400 meters or so, 1,300 feet. And then it comes down at some rate under a drogue, and then it comes down slower. So this is a dual deploy flight. And this red indicates that it's firing one of the charges, and this blue indicates that it's firing the other charge. So now that I have this in the memory of the software, I can actually control the device, and it will say emulate launch. So watch what happens both to my lights and also to my screen. I'm going to read off the screen. I'll tell you what to expect. I expect it to say waiting for launch, and then suddenly it's going to start reading the data and say launching, and then about 12 seconds later, it's going to make one of my lights glow. That's the drogue firing. And then about 20 seconds after that, it's going to make the other light glow. That's the main firing. And my car just turned off again. Oh, 1 moment. This car is a little too smart for its own good. Okay, so here we go. Oops. Let's try emulate launch. Watch the picture and watch the screen. Okay, so it's waiting. And then after like 12 seconds, it's going to pretend that it launched. Okay, so now it's pretending that it's flying. So it actually stopped beeping and it's running, and about 10 seconds in, it's going to say, oh, line B fired. Did you see it glow? I didn't see it glow because I was watching the screen too closely.
Yeah, it lit up.
Yes, it lit up. Great. Haha, it works. Okay. So this is how you go about testing your AIM USB. Basically, put in some LEDs instead of e-matches, and then load some data and let it run through as if it was doing a flight. Okay.
That other one you were showing us, was that for a an I or a J?
No. Let's take a quick look. That's a K1200.
J, okay.
So in this particular case, I'll tell you right now, the graphs in this program are lousy. For instance, they don't even give you axes on the graphs, but they do tell you something. So for instance, here it says there was apogee and it was at 8,000 feet. Okay, so that's a pretty serious motor that pushed you up pretty high. And it looks like this one, I can't even quite see. Yes, here's where it fired one of the charges at apogee, and then here it fired the other charge, the main, and notice the if you can see it, barely, the slope changes. That means it pulled a second parachute and it landed more slowly, but this was much higher, much longer flight duration, and it doesn't tell me as much as I would like to see on the graph. The data, you can also download the data and graph it yourself and do better. Okay, we're getting close to the end here. I think that's what I wanted to show you. So again, I'm going to disconnect my electronics, pull out my battery. You need to build yourself a sled. The sled has to fit so that it does not rattle around. Either make the sled exactly the same length as the Av Bay with some notches perhaps, or I think Kelly did this, put on some extra nuts onto your threaded rod to hold the sled at some specific location, typically as far up. This way, as far up as it can go. Get it up as high as it can go, and then use nuts to hold it there, and then put the second bulk plate on. And then it has to have an AIM USB. It has to have a battery. It has to have wires between the two. And those wires have to be more complicated than I have here, because my wires go directly between the two. You need to have your wires go to a switch, and the switch is over here. The switch is off of the unit, and so you have to go from here to the switch, back to here. And we described earlier how that's done. If you have questions, let me know, let Kelly know. We can talk through it more exactly.
And they'll also want to find a way to secure the battery to the tray.
Absolutely. So in this particular case, I'll tell you how this one is screwed. This one has two screws. There's one screw there and the other one has gone missing. But anyway, there's two places to screw this to the tray if the tray is made of something like wood. And then the battery, if you use this metal plate, it has 4 places to screw the battery down. So, and I happen to have a zip tie underneath the battery holder. That was to allow me to do something completely different. So you don't have to worry about that. And then
how do you secure the 9-volt into there though?
Oh, that's a good point. So the 9-volt, thank you. This is how I secured the battery holder to the thing. But then when I put the battery in, I need to secure that as well. And what I did there is I wrapped it around top and bottom and side to side with zip ties. Just make sure that the thing isn't so wide that you can't get zip ties in. If this thing is right up against the edge of your airframe, then you can't get zip ties around the edge. Notice this zip tie here, it's actually in a notch. And the reason is it wouldn't fit when the zip tie was over the very edge. So I made a notch and I put the zip tie. The zip tie is slightly recessed. Okay. And then last but not least at all, you need to have wires. The wires that go from the electronics up through the bulk plate to the connections on the top. And the reason we do that is because we need to wire our e-match, which is going to have gunpowder, okay? But I don't want to have to wire that inside every single time. So I'm just going to run wires more or less permanently from the electronics to the surface. And then I can actually make the final connection. I can add an e-match, and if it explodes, I can take it off and add another e-match without ever opening up the AV bay. So this is another way to make this thing more serviceable, is run the wires right here. Notice they go through from the inside to the outside. There's an example of a hole that I could potentially plug, since I don't need those wires to come on and off with any regularity, possibly never. And then once I have the wires where I need to be, I could just attach to the other side. We're going to use a slightly different shaped terminal block called a lever nut, but excepting for that, it will electrically do exactly this. Wires from the inside to the outside, and then you can do all of your connections and reconnections between flights and whatever exclusively on the outside. Here's the bottom one. And so the bottom one has the wires ready to go. But in this case, these wires probably have to be able to come out, because I like to take the bottom one off. I don't take the top one off. So the wires on the top one, I tend to leave in place. The wires on the bottom one, I tend to remove while I'm assembling and disassembling it. And that's why it says this side down. It's important. The two end plates look the same, but the wires that go through them, some of them have to be removed and some of them don't. And so they are actually different in that way. I think that's what I got, and it is 6:30 your time and not 6:30 my time. Any final comments, questions as people are, before you depart? You can stick around. I can stay for a few minutes. Kelly can stay for a few minutes, but other than that, we're done with our presentation for today.
I had a quick question. For that altimeter, that's not going into the AV bay, correct?
The altimeter 2, the
Right.
data load. So you have two options. One option is to put it in the avionics bay. The second option, which I would prefer, is to put it into the nose cone. And you have a hole in the nose cone, so there's an easy way to get it into the nose cone. The reason I prefer that is it's much easier to get it in and out. You don't have to open up the AV bay to reach it. And that's important because once you turn it on, it will time out after a while. And so you want to turn it on relatively late, like right after you have finished your safety check and before you walk out to the pad. And the AV bay has to be turned on, or not turned on, but completely sealed up way before that. So my recommendation is plan to put your altimeter 2 inside your nose cone. And to keep it from rattling around, I'll give you packing peanuts. So literally fill up your nose cone with styrofoam and then just thrust the altimeter 2 in among the packing peanuts, and there it will stay. Tape the hole shut, because that hole, once you blow your nose cone off, is open to the air and things can fall out, including altimeter 2s if you're not careful. Here's the only downside of what I'm suggesting, and that is we're going to vent the AV bay because the AIM USB needs to know the outside pressure. Apparently, we're going to vent the nose cone too, because the altimeter 2 needs to know the outside pressure. We'll talk about venting things next week.
So I'm doing a third option personally. I have resealed the nose cone on mine.
Okay.
But I have this. So I have a micro beacon beeper, which has its own audio beeping. It's connected to a line that runs straight through it. And I've connected my altimeter 2 directly in the line there. And then this will connect to the eye bolt on the nose cone, which means that my upper body tube has to have a vent hole near the cuff or the shoulder of the nose cone. So I connect this along with my harness for my parachute to the nose cone eye bolt. Right here is a hole in my upper body tube, and that is what vents the upper part to give the altimeter 2 a good reading.
No, that's fine. Basically, that's what we did with the model rocket. We hung our altimeter 2, we hung it from the nose cone. You can hang it from this nose cone too. It just exposes it potentially to explosives, depending on whether you use a piston or not. And so what Kelly's doing is fine. That is a third very genuine option.
Does anybody else have any questions?
Okay, well, seeing none, it's sunny here. And I think it's maybe not sunny there, which is unfortunate because there's an eclipse coming up and you could see it, and I will hope to see it too on Saturday, but I think it may be too cloudy for you to see it. But I will see it. I will tell you about it, maybe next week.
Dr. Flaten, if you want to hang out for a minute, we can discuss Saturday.
That would be fine. Let me just turn off this recording. One moment. Recording. Oh, I can't turn off the recording because you're the host. Can you turn off the recording?
Sure.